You know, this video was supposed to drop a couple of hours ago, but I'm not gonna lie, I completely overslept today, so that's my bad. But I genuinely cannot believe how much support the last video got. You guys wouldn't even understand. It has been so incredibly long since one of my part 1 videos has done that well. The video nearly broke 1,000 likes in under 24 hours. It didn't quite do it, but the amount of support and people commenting and begging for more, there's no way that I couldn't drop the second part to this. So ladies and gentlemen, the like goal for today's video is gonna be, I think that if all of you who stayed and are here on this video, you guys could easily smash 700 likes. So once you guys hit that, I'll be sure to drop the next part of what if Deku had a superhero quirk. But without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. Immediately kicking our story off where we had left off, Izuku would be in class answering his classmates' questions, with people crowding around him asking him what it's like to have so many quirks. At hearing this, Todoroki in the back of the classroom would say that it's not all that. He also has multiple quirks, but as they would continue to name off the abilities that Izuku has and he proceeds to answer more and more questions, Izuku would start revealing that he has even more powers. He would say, well, the extent of my quirk from what I know is flight, super strength, super speed, invisibility, invulnerability, regeneration, freeze breath, x-ray, and I can also tell what people's quirks are just by looking at them. As Izuku would explain this, the class would be like, what? You have that many quirks? That's insane! How do you even control all of them? What's the backlash? Izuku sitting there would begin to actually bite on his nails as he would think, backlash? I don't think I actually have one. I mean, unless invulnerability counts, because if I was to go to the doctor, there's no way they could even heal me with medical tools. They would be like, what? That's your weakness? And as Izuku's sitting there just kind of like, is that a bad thing? This is when they would start getting even more crazy around him, and the girls in class 1A would be like, it must be so awesome to have a quirk like this. As Izuku would chuckle, and his eyes would suddenly lock on with All Might. Above his head, it would say, one for all. And as Izuku would stare at All Might, Izuku would be like, All Might, it's you. But everybody is still crowded around Deku, with some people noticing All Might and just kind of waving at him as they go back to fangirling about Izuku who's in their classroom. All Might is just kind of sitting there like, I am here. As the class would continue to ignore All Might, and he would stare at Izuku with a little bit of a jealous and just confused expression. It's at this point that All Might would think to himself, well, the young man is very popular and he is very strong. It's at this point that he'd go, class, can I get your attention? This is when everybody would finally turn to All Might, and he would go on to explain today what they're going to be doing, with someone finally asking the big question. What are you doing here, All Might? All Might at this point would smile as he would say, I'm going to be one of your homeroom teachers, and I'm going to be responsible for training you guys into the best heroes you can be. It's at this point that Izuku looking at All Might would give him a smile, and the two would lock eyes as All Might would smile back at him. After this, he would go on to explain what's going to go on today, how Aizawa's not going to be involved, and reveal to them their hero costumes. Once this would all be over, the class would finally settle down, and they would all suit up into their new hero gear. It's at this point that all of them would begin to be explained to them how today's event's gonna work, and All Might would pretty much tell them that it's gonna be simple. They're gonna cast lots and go against each other in 2v2 battles. He'd preface this by telling them not to go too far with their quirks, that this is only training. So as everybody would begin pulling out their lots, people would begin hoping that they could get partnered up with Deku, that it's an easy pass. However, there's two people in the classroom who don't exactly feel the same, and those two would consist of Bakugo and Todoroki, who feels like his thunder is kind of being stolen. Not that he likes being in the spotlight, but just the fact that everybody else has already considered Izuku better than him is kind of rubbing Todoroki off the wrong way. So, as soon as this would start, Todoroki and Bakugo would reveal their lots. The both of them got paired up together. Todoroki would stare at Bakugo unsure of how he feels being paired up with him, and Bakugo would stare at Todoroki saying, just don't get in my way, you half and half bastard. It's at this point that we would get Deku being paired up with Uraraka, and she'd be like, whoa, I got paired up with Mr. Superhero. Oh, and by the way, for some of you that might be wondering, yo, what happened with Uraraka during the entrance exam? Well, I figure that there's no way that students actually die in those those tests, so there has to be some sort of off and on switch that Nezu could probably press. Plus, if that isn't the case, I can definitely see a pro hero stepping in and saving her instead. But regardless of what option you want to take, she's fine. Anyways though, once this would happen, Izuku and Uraraka would introduce themselves to each other, and after Izuku finds out about Uraraka's gravity quirk, he's like, "What? You have a gravity quirk? That is awesome! I wish I could have one of those quirks." And Uraraka hearing that would be like, "Yeah, quirks, right." But regardless, as soon as the event would begin, Izuku and Uraraka inside of the room would begin to look around, and as Izuku would use his X-ray vision to spot the bomb and the location of his opponents, Izuku notices that one of them was about to use their quirk. Half hot, half cold. Izuku, instantly picking Uraraka up in his arms like a lady in distress, would fly up in the air, begin hovering above the ground, and she'd say, is this necessary?" As Izuku would stare at her, telling her that this is a hero's job. It's their responsibility to protect a pretty lady in distress. And so as Uraraka would pretty much be inside of Deku's arm and muscular body, she would just start like blushing like crazy, all the while Deku could see ice begin to form around the entirety of the room. Izuku knowing that Todoroki was gonna pull something like that. However, it's at this moment that Deku could see a silhouette of Bakugo probably barking at the direction of Todoroki. As Izuku, being curious as to what Bakugo's saying, he would begin using his super hearing. This is when he would hear Bakugo go, "Hey, you damn half and half bastard! You ended up freezing the place! My quirk isn't gonna be as effective with all this ice around!" And Todoroki would stare at Bakugo, saying that's not his problem, that the two of them have probably already been captured. And so Todoroki would begin walking down, going to see if he can find them, seeing as he's convinced that either Deku or Uraraka was frozen in his ice. However, Deku, being the smarter of the two of them, would literally tell Uraraka that they're gonna go out the window. So flying right out of it and hearing glass cracking, Bakugo would remain in the room knowing that Deku is probably going to go straight there. So as Todoroki would have left the room in search of Izuku and Uraraka, Bakugo would stay up there thinking to himself that he can't wait to tear Deku a new one, that he's going to show him the fruits of his training and prove to everybody that Deku's not that special. But it'd be at this point that Deku and Uraraka would come crashing through a window, as coming face to face with Bakugo, Bakugo would smirk, shooting an explosion towards the direction of Deku, using a weaker version of howitzer impact. It's at this point that Deku would catch Bakugo's arm with one hand and then fling him towards the other side of the room. Then as Bakugo would try to shoot explosions towards him, Deku would counter them easily with a super breath, simply going as Bakugo's explosions would be completely stopped and Bakugo could feel himself being frozen to the wall. Bakugo in this moment, feeling pissed, would say, "Don't underestimate me!" But as he would get himself free from the ice, it's at this point that Uraraka, having walked over to the bomb, would begin placing her hand on it. And so, as Todoroki would have realized what had gone down, he would be just a half a step too late, and the hero team would win. All Might would announce the results, and as everybody would watch, they'd be like, "Whoa, he just took down two of the most powerful people in the class, right? I mean, on paper they should be, right?" Suyu would say. The class would begin talking over this, but as Izuku would walk in the room, everybody would instantly be like, "Yeah, no, he's definitely the strongest." And so Izuku, going over towards the boys, would begin talking to them as they begin singing his praises. And as this would take place, Izuku could only sit there with a smile on his face going, "You guys, it's not that cool." To which Mineta would go, "Not that cool? Not that cool? You just saved the damsel in distress. How nice did it feel to hold her in your arms?" Izuku would look at Mineta going, "You're a weirdo, aren't you?" As the day would be over, and then we would get the next big event that we have to cover, the USJ arc. This would all start off with everybody in the bus, and Izuku being crowded by Mina and Uraraka, who, has established a good friendship with Izuku. We have Invisible Girl there and Suyu. Like, all the girls are near Izuku and they're all trying to talk to him about how cool his quirk is. We would even have some of the guys who are not ashamed to admit that they think he's the coolest, like Kirishima and Kaminari. Mineta would be there just because the girls are around. And meanwhile, we have Todoroki and Bakugo towards the front of the bus as they're just staring at each other, both envious of Deku's praises and how everybody just thinks that he's so much better than them. They'd be pissed. The two of them would be staring at each other with an agreement of, "Yeah, we're gonna crush him." But unfortunately for them, that little dream of theirs is probably not going to become a reality. But anyways, eventually the class would arrive, and it's at this point that the Hero 13 would start to give out her very boring speech. Then suddenly, Kurogiri would warp gate into the arena as Izuku would stare at him and read the quirk warp gate. It's at this point that Izuku, turning towards Aizawa, would question why he's here, thinking that this must be some sort of villain exercise. But as Aizawa would jump down towards the massive bundle of villains, Izuku would realize that this is not a game. This is real. So, with a slight smile cracking on Deku's face, him trying to hide it, Deku would use his super breath to shoot Kurogiri away, not giving him the chance to even use his warp gate quirk on the rest of the students. Deku at this point would fly up into the air, as using his heat vision, he would shoot it towards the direction of some villains that were currently trying to fight Aizawa. He would take down a grand total of 4 villains helping him out, as suddenly, Kurogiri, having recovered, would end up trying to warp gate Deku away. However, Deku would be so incredibly fast that he would only be sitting there trying to warp gate an after image, as Izuku would go flying at Kurogiri and punch straight into the metal thing that Kurogiri had, his only weakness. After this, he would leave Kurogiri unconscious, as Izuku would float in the air, kind of like Superman does, with everybody watching him, and Shigaraki saying, "Nomu, kill the brat. Let's show this hero that he's not as strong as he thinks he is." It's at this point that the Nomu would lunge to the direction of Deku in the air, reeling its fist back, going to punch Izuku, and as the punch would land, Deku would simply stare at the Nomu with a bored expression, thinking, "I had hoped you were better than this." It's at this point that we would cut to Shigaraki watching the punch land, as he would think, "Finally, now that little brat's gonna finally come off his high horse." But Izuku, simply standing there, having seemed to take 0 damage, would look back at the Nomu, grabbing its arm and keeping it floating above. The Nomu trying to gash and punch at Izuku, but none of the blows would do a thing to him. Suddenly, Deku would uppercut the Nomu into the sky, disappearing, as in Superman fashion, you could just hear a sonic boom. Deku flies into the air and begins pummeling the Nomu, eventually dropping an elbow on it, sending it crashing into the USJ. The wind pressure of this would blow through the entire place, sending a massive amount of wind and air flying throughout it. And as Izuku would land on the Nomu, Deku would land dropping both knees on its gut, as he would then grab the Nomu by the head and start using his laser vision to shoot it straight into the Nomu's eyes and brain. The Nomu in this moment would start screeching, and Izuku would have a smile on his face, as a more sadistic side of Deku would be revealed, and it would be shown that he actually loves a good fight, even though he can never have one. But as everybody would watch on, Class 1A I mean, they would be stunned. The Nomu would be on the ground as its arms and limbs and stuff like that would stop regenerating, and Izuku would get up, looking towards the direction of Shigaraki, as he could read the quirk, Decay. Izuku, seeing that, looking towards Shigaraki, would say, "You got a pretty interesting quirk. Too bad you're going to be spending your life in prison for the foreseeable future." Shigaraki, looking at Izuku, would say, You're a monster," as he would try to decay Izuku. However, Izuku, just completely dodging the attack, would then gut punch Shigaraki, as a bruise would be placed on his stomach the size of Deku's fist. He'd practically indent it in. Izuku in this moment would whisper something to Shigaraki before he passes out of consciousness, and as he would be like kind of in and out of that state, Shigaraki would hear Izuku tell him that if he ever tries to attack UA, he's dead. It's at this point that Shigaraki, falling into full unconsciousness, would fall to the ground, and every single one of the rest of the villains remaining would then be gathered by Izuku, who, using supersonic speeds as time would seem to slow down, Deku would defeat all of the rest of the villains before Aizawa even had the chance to speak up against Deku, similar to the Metro Man scene that we get inside of the Megamind movie, where he like has an internal life crisis as Megamind's like, "Fire!" Like he's doing that whole scene. But anyways, with that being the case, Aizawa would walk over towards Izuku as time would finally go back to normal, and he would ask Izuku just how strong he truly is. Izuku would tell Aizawa that he's pretty strong, as he would then pretty much tell Aizawa that the rest of the villains have already been rounded up. Aizawa would say, "What? But you just finished here." And Izuku would say, "I used my super speed to round them all up. Hope that's not a problem." Aizawa, being stunned at the fact that he moved so fast that by the time that he had gotten the chance to to walk over towards him, the rest of the villains were handled as well. As I was staring at Izuku, would think, I guess we ought to be lucky that he's not on the villain side, because if he was, I don't think there's even a prayer that could keep us from all being destroyed. It's at this point that Aizawa, staring at Deku's back, would then wonder if All Might could potentially pose some sort of threat to Izuku. But unfortunately for the heroes, he's not going to be doing a thing to Izuku either. It's at this point that the USJ incident would go live, with the news pretty much reporting that All Might and the heroes had handled the entire situation, not wanting an entire news break happening where everybody finds out the truth. So, after this would all be over, Izuku would kind of be laying in his own room, reading some manga comics, as he would then take a deep sigh and go, when am I ever gonna get to have a fight incredible like this against a villain who can actually pose a threat to me? This is so boring. Being a hero is cool and all, but come on now. Is it too much for a guy to ask for an exhilarating fight? Izuku at this point would hear a knock at his door, as it would be Inko bringing him a couple of snacks. She would ask Izuku how he's feeling, and Izuku would just have a big bright smile, saying that he's feeling awesome. She would ask Izuku how he would feel about going out to eat later on today, and he's like, sure, where are we going? And it's at this point that she'd say, your favorite, fish and chips. Izuku's like, what? Yeah, let's go. As this is when we would get a scene of Izuku in their car and going off to go, like eating some food and stuff like that. After this, the screen would kind of fade to black, and we would then cut into all of the students in Class 1A having been informed about the activities of the UA Sports Festival. People would be like, what? The UA Sports Festival? That's really happening? Even with the villain attack? Aizawa would say, yeah, of course it is. This year we figure that even if a villain attack, if you could even call it that, happened, we should be fine, especially since Izuku's gonna be there. He would then sing praises to Izuku for a second, with everybody being like, yeah, you're right. Izuku handled that threat like a boss. None of us could even do a thing about it, but he came in there and defeated everybody. It's at this point that Aizawa would nod, saying that they don't even know the half of it. Izuku had defeated all the other villains before anybody even had a chance to try to stand up to him. And so, with that being said, the students would all be super hyped, as the rest of the classrooms would be standing outside of their doorway, and as Izuku would use his x-ray vision, he would know exactly what's gonna happen. So, using his super speed, Deku would grab his binder and his things, as he'd put it into his backpack and walk past the crowd without them even realizing what had happened. Some people seeing Izuku behind them would say, what? There's a student in 1A that has a teleport quirk? But nobody realizing what had truly happened, that Izuku didn't teleport but straight up just ran by them, they'd all be stunned. Some of them would realize that that had to be what happened, because they could feel a gentle breeze go by them when Izuku had appeared behind them. So with that said, we would finally then cut to a scene where every single student going to UA, obviously in their first year, would be setting up for the race. It's at this point that we could see Izuku doing a couple of toe touches, as President Mike would finally say, and now we're going to be beginning the hero race. It's at this point that Midnight would go on to pretty much announce that the race had begun, and the second this would happen, Izuku could see Todoroki about to use his ice quirk to freeze everyone in place. So Izuku would just let it happen, deciding that it's a cool opportunity to show off. So as his legs would be frozen solid, Deku would snap right out of it, flying right next to Todoroki at equal pace, not going full throttle, simply to make this a bit more entertaining for the fans. And Bakugo would come in shortly after, going, don't forget about me, damn it, blowing explosions. I'm about to catch up to you, Deku. He would then seize Izuku's, right next to them. He's like neck and neck with the both of them, and as Todoroki would freeze the 0-pointer, Deku would fly towards one as he would punch it into the stratosphere. Everybody watching as a chain reaction of the explosion would happen mid-air, the punch being so fast that the robot would already be basically in space before it had fully exploded. And you could just kind of see like a firework display in the sky as Izuku would continue flying next to Todoroki and Bakugo. Everybody having seen that would lose their minds. It's like, what? He's that strong? As we would then get some questioning whether this kid is even stronger than All Might. People being like, no, there's no way, right? There's no way that anybody could be stronger than the symbol of peace. But as President Mike would begin hyping Deku up, saying that he's the brightest prospect in UA, even more so than the son of the number 2 hero Endeavor, Todoroki would kind of be like, whatever. As the race would continue, and Izuku, trying to keep up with Todoroki and Bakugo to make it look like a close race, would finally make it to the mine section. It's at this point that Izuku, using his laser vision and x-ray vision in tandem, would blow each and every single one of them up behind him, as the path to get to the actual finish line would be clouded with smoke and dust, and Todoroki and Bakugo would do their best to avoid that. However, by the time that they would clear that section, Izuku would already be at the finish line, with Present Mike freaking out. Whoa, with incredible speed, Izuku managed to clear the remainder of the test like it was nothing! Everybody would start cheering for Deku and the crowd would go nuts. As after this would take place, we would get the cavalry battles, which I'm gonna skip, and then we would get the 1v1 fights, Shinszo versus Deku. As Izuku would step onto the ring, he would look at Shinszo as he would say, "Interesting, so you've got a brainwash quirk." Shinszo in this moment would go, "What? How did you know that?" But Izuku would simply stay quiet, not answering his question. Shinszo would think to himself, "Dang it, did he figure me out already?" And Izuku in his mind would think, "It's an interesting quirk and it probably would have worked if I didn't have this quirk." He would then go on to read the information about Shinszo's quirk, how it works via getting somebody to talk to him in his mind, with Izuku walking slowly towards Shinszo. Shinszo in this moment freaking out would try to hit Deku in this moment. However, Deku not taking any impact from that blow, and that punch actually hurting Shinszo's hand, Deku would simply apologize to Shinszo for what's about to happen next. Shinszo going, "What? What are you talking about?" But before Shinszo could even finish his thought, he would be sent flying back into the grass by Izuku's super breath, as some bits and pieces of ice shards would be on Shinszo's skin. It looks like he had taken a chicken out to defrost. But as Shinszo would find himself on the grass looking up at the sky, he would think, "The difference between our powers, it's horrifying." He would in his mind conjure up an image of Deku on the top of a mountain, and even higher than that, flying above it all, as Shinszo would be on the ground looking up as nothing but a mere citizen. It's at this point that Deku smiles to Shinszo and tells him maybe he'll have better luck next time. It's at this point that the crowd would go wild at them saying, "What? Even more quirks?" And Present Mike would start to explain that Izuku Midoriya is their biggest and brightest student because he has multiple quirks. The crowd would go absolutely nuts with them begging for another fight from Izuku instantly, but Present Mike would say that they're gonna have to watch the rest of the students, and the crowd would just be like, "Come on, we want more Izuku," because they're just like you guys and they want to see a part 3. So ladies and gentlemen, that's where I'm gonna be wrapping this video up for today. If you guys want a part 3, remember you guys are gonna be needing to smash 700 likes, and I know you could do it. So with that said, I'm gonna pass the mic to a buddy of mine.
I am here, thanking you for making it to the end of the video. Remember to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with a friend, and stay plus ultra!